The chamber had been designed for endings, not the quiet kind, but the deliberate ceremonial kind that left no room for doubt or revision. Every surface held a memory, etched sigils that pulsed faintly with ancient energy, recording judgments long before Vesha had been born. The air carried a low hum, as if the room itself remembered every life it had witnessed conclude. Queen Vesha stood at its center, unmoving, her posture exact, her long ears angled slightly back in a gesture her people understood well, restraint under pressure. The court behind her formed a silent arc of silver-armored figures, their presence less like an audience and more like a verdict already waiting to happen. Before her stood the human. Coran did not bow. That in itself was either bravery or a catastrophic misunderstanding of how this day was meant to proceed. Vesha studied him in stillness. He was unarmed, as agreed, though she suspected the humans would argue that their most dangerous weapons were rarely visible. His clothing bore the insignia of a fractured alliance, stitched together hastily enough that even she could recognize the uneven seams. A representative of a species that had taken a generation from her people, and yet he looked almost ordinary. That, she realized, was the first irritation. "You understand where you are," she said at last, her voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. Coran nodded once. "Yes." No trembling, no dramatic final speech, no desperate attempt to negotiate with a decision that had been written into history long before either of them had been born. It was, frankly, a little inconvenient. Vesha took a slow step forward. The floor responded beneath her feet, faint light rippling outward in acknowledgement of her authority. The execution protocols were active. All she needed to do was speak the final command. "I made an oath," she said, more to the room than to him. "The first human I would face after the war would not leave alive." A murmur passed through the court, quiet but electric. Coran exhaled almost thoughtfully. "That sounds like something people say when they're very certain of how the future will go." Vesha's gaze sharpened. "And yet," he added, tilting his head slightly, "history suggests we are not very good at predicting that." One of the advisors behind her shifted, armor plates whispering in restrained disapproval. This was not how executions were meant to sound. There were expectations. Tone, for one. A proper sense of impending doom, ideally. "You speak freely," Vesha observed. "I was told honesty might improve my chances," Coran replied. He paused, then added, "I am beginning to suspect that was optimistic advice." There it was. Humor in this room. Vesha felt something unfamiliar flicker. Not amusement, certainly not, but a disruption in the clean, cold line of her intent. "You do not deny your people's actions," she said. "No," Coran answered. "It would be a strange strategy to deny something you could list in detail for the next 6 hours." "That will not be necessary." "Good," he said. "I had concerns about the acoustics." A faint, almost imperceptible shift moved through the court. Not laughter. Her people did not laugh in chambers like this, but something dangerously close to it. Vesha stopped a few steps away from him now, close enough to see the steadiness in his eyes, close enough to notice that whatever fear he felt, he had chosen not to let it decide his posture. That, more than anything, unsettled her. "You expected to die here," she said. "Yes, and yet you came." He considered that for a moment. It seemed more productive than not coming. Vesha blinked once, slowly. This was not how enemies behaved. Enemies pleaded or threatened, or hid behind layers of rhetoric. They did not stand calmly in the center of a chamber designed to end them and offer mild commentary on the situation. The sigils along the walls pulsed brighter, awaiting her command. The room was ready. History was ready. Her oath, ancient, absolute, waited on the edge of completion. All she had to do was finish it. She raised her hand. The chamber held its breath. Coran did not move. For a fraction of a moment, Vesha saw it. The simplicity of the path she had chosen long ago. Clean, final, certain. And then, just as quickly, she saw something else. Not forgiveness, not hesitation. Complexity. Annoying, persistent, undeniable complexity. Her hand lowered. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the court. "The execution is postponed," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the shock. "Negotiations will proceed as scheduled." Silence crashed into the space where certainty had been. One of her advisors stepped forward, unable to contain himself. "Your Majesty, is that unclear?" Vesha asked without turning. He stopped immediately. Behind her, the ancient sigils dimmed, their light fading into a quiet, disappointed glow. Coran remained where he stood, though something in his expression shifted. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Relief, perhaps, or confusion. Possibly both. "That," he said after a moment, "was not the outcome I had prepared for." Vesha turned to face him fully, her gaze steady, unreadable. "Then you may consider this your first lesson," she said. "You are no longer dealing with outcomes you can prepare for." She began to walk past him, her steps measured, controlled. After a brief hesitation, he fell into step beside her. Not behind, beside. The court watched in stunned silence as the queen of a wounded civilization and the man she had sworn to kill left the chamber together. Neither of them quite certain what had just begun, only that something had shifted and that it would not easily be undone. The negotiation chamber had not been designed for comfort. It had been designed for endurance. Long, seamless walls curved upward into a ceiling that shimmered with slow-moving constellations. An artificial sky meant to remind both sides of what had nearly been lost. The table at its center was an elongated arc of translucent material, beneath which faint currents of energy flowed like a restrained storm. Every seat was precisely measured, every angle calculated to prevent advantage. Even silence here felt structured. Queen Vesha arrived first. She always did. Her advisors took their places in a quiet formation behind her, their expressions carefully neutral, though she could feel the tension in the subtle shifts of their posture. They had not yet recovered from her decision in the execution chamber. She had not either, though she would not have admitted it even if asked directly, which fortunately, no one was foolish enough to attempt. A moment later, the far doors parted. Coran entered without ceremony. He paused just inside the threshold, glancing upward at the artificial sky. "I appreciate the effort," he said almost to himself, "though I feel obligated to point out that our version of stars usually doesn't hum." The ceiling did, in fact, hum, softly, constantly. "It is a stabilizing frequency," Vesha said. "Ah," Coran nodded, "then I will try not to destabilize anything." One of the advisors made a sound that could have been a suppressed sigh or the early stages of a diplomatic crisis. Coran took his seat across from her, placing a small data slate on the table. It immediately synced with the chamber's systems, projecting a faint lattice of information between them. Vesha watched the process with a critical eye. Human technology had always been enthusiastic. Functional, certainly, but prone to unnecessary flourish. "Before we begin," Coran said, glancing at the projection, "I was informed there would be translators present." "There are," Vesha replied. He looked around. "Invisible translators. They are integrated into the room." Coran considered that. "Of course they are." For a brief moment, everything remained still. Then the projection flickered. A line of text appeared between them, crisp and official. "Commencing diplomatic exchange protocol." Below it, another line followed. "Today's recommended dish, spiced root stew." Coran blinked. Vesha did not. An advisor leaned forward sharply. "There appears to be a minor interference." "Is it always this helpful?" Coran asked. "No," Vesha said, her voice perfectly steady. "This is new." The projection flickered again. "Suggested cooking time, 47 minutes." Coran rested his chin briefly against his hand. "I do admire a system that commits fully to its errors." One of the technicians at the edge of the chamber scrambled to correct the malfunction. The projection stuttered, the culinary advice vanishing as quickly as it had appeared, replaced once more with structured diplomatic data. Vesha allowed a single breath to pass before speaking. "We will proceed," Coran nodded. "I was hoping you would say that. I don't cook. You have devices that do it for you." "Yes," he said, "and they judge me silently when I misuse them." For a fraction of a second, something in Vesha's expression shifted. It was gone before anyone could be certain it had been there. The negotiations began. Data moved between them in precise streams. territorial adjustments, resource allocations, reconstruction agreements. Each point carried weight, history pressing into every decision. Vesha spoke with clarity, her arguments exact, her logic difficult to challenge. Coran responded with a different rhythm, less formal, but no less deliberate, his words carrying an honesty that did not attempt to soften the past. At one point, Vesha paused, studying a proposal. "You acknowledge responsibility for this sector," she said. "Yes. And yet you request shared oversight." "Yes. That is contradictory." Coran shook his head slightly. "No. It is uncomfortable." Vesha's gaze lingered on him. "Explain," she said. "If we take full control, it becomes ours to manage and yours to resent," Coran said. "If you take full control, it becomes yours to rebuild and ours to regret. Shared oversight means neither of us gets to be comfortable with the outcome." A quiet settled over the chamber. One of her advisors shifted again, clearly displeased. Vesha leaned back slightly in her seat, her long ears angling just a fraction as she considered his words. "You propose a solution that satisfies neither side." "Yes," Coran said. "Those are usually the ones that last." There it was again, that inconvenient clarity. The discussion moved forward, though not without friction. There were moments of sharp disagreement, voices tightening, old wounds pressing against new attempts at resolution, and yet somehow the tension never reached the breaking point it should have. At one moment, as a particularly complex projection expanded between them, Coran frowned slightly. "I have a question," he said. Vesha did not look up from the data. "Ask it. Is there a reason your system organizes everything in spirals?" She glanced at the projection. "It is the most efficient structure. It is also mildly disorienting. That is because you are interpreting it incorrectly." Coran leaned back. "That is a possibility I am trying to ignore." Vesha exhaled, slow and controlled. Then with a small, precise gesture, she adjusted the projection. The spirals shifted, reorganizing into a more linear form. Coran blinked. "You can do that?" "Yes. And you chose not to." "I chose efficiency." He nodded thoughtfully. "Of course." A pause. "Thank you," he added. Vesha inclined her head slightly. The negotiations continued. Hours passed, though the chamber gave no indication of time. The artificial stars above them shifted subtly, marking a cycle only her people fully understood. Coran remained focused, though a certain weariness began to edge into his posture. At one point he rubbed his eyes briefly, then looked back at her. "I assume you do not get tired," he said. "I do," Vesha replied. "You hide it well." "It is not something I consider useful to display." Coran nodded. "That explains a great deal about your entire civilization." One of the advisors made a sharper sound this time. Vesha ignored it. Instead, she studied Coran for a moment longer than necessary. "You expected hostility," she said. "Yes. And yet you continue to speak as though you do not find this surprising." Coran considered that. "I find many things surprising," he said. "I just try not to let them interrupt the conversation." Vesha held his gaze. For a moment, the chamber, the war, the weight of everything between them seemed to recede, just slightly, not gone, but less absolute. Then the moment passed. "Continue," she said, and he did. The transport platform descended in near silence, its gravitational field adjusting so smoothly that the motion felt more like a shift in thought than a change in position. Below them, the city stretched outward in fractured layers, sections rebuilt with clean, luminous architecture, standing beside ruins that still bore the sharp edges of recent destruction. Energy conduits glowed faintly beneath translucent walkways, threading life back into a place that had nearly lost it. Vesha stood at the edge of the platform as it settled, her gaze moving across the horizon with a precision that missed nothing. Her long ears tilted slightly, catching the layered sounds of reconstruction. Distant machinery, measured voices, the low hum of atmospheric stabilizers working to repair damage humans could not even perceive. Coran stepped down beside her, pausing for a moment as if recalibrating his balance. "Your cities," he said, glancing around, "feel like they're deciding whether to exist again." "They are. Vesha replied. That seems stressful. It is efficient. He nodded, as though that explained everything. Of course it is. A small escort of guards maintained a respectful distance behind them, their presence less intrusive here than it would have been in the chamber. This was not a place of ceremony. It was a place of consequence. They began to walk. The pathway beneath their feet responded subtly to their movement, adjusting its surface to maintain perfect stability. On either side, structures rose in elegant arcs, their surfaces shifting color as embedded systems recalibrated to new environmental data. Between them, fragments of older buildings remained, broken edges, collapsed supports, the silent testimony of a war that had not been clean, despite what official reports might claim. Coran slowed slightly near one of the damaged sections, studying the remains. We have places like this too, he said, though ours tend to look less intentional. Vesha followed his gaze. This was a residential sector. He winced faintly. That explains the lack of defensive structures. It explains the casualties, she corrected. Coran inclined his head. Yes. They continued in silence for a few steps. A small drone drifted overhead, scanning the area with a soft pulse of blue light. It paused briefly above Coran, then emitted a faint tone. He looked up at it. I feel evaluated. It is assessing your biological stability, Vesha said. That sounds important. It is. The drone emitted another tone, then moved on. Coran exhaled. Well, I am relieved to report that I remain biologically stable. That was never in doubt. Your confidence is reassuring. There it was again. That steady, unforced humor, slipping into moments that should have been too heavy to carry anything but silence. Vesha did not respond immediately. Instead, she adjusted her pace slightly, aligning it more closely with his. They moved deeper into the district, where reconstruction had progressed further. Structures here were whole, their surfaces gleaming with renewed energy. A group of children, her people's children, stood near a projection interface, their long ears flicking with curiosity as they manipulated a floating model of the city. Coran slowed again. They look the same, he said quietly. They are, Vesha replied. I suppose I expected... He hesitated. Difference, she finished. Yes. Vesha watched the children for a moment. You would not see it, not immediately. Coran nodded, though his gaze lingered. One of the children noticed them, her attention snapping into sharp focus. She stepped forward, her eyes wide, studying Coran with open curiosity. Vesha remained still. The child tilted her head. You are the human, she said. Coran considered that. I am one of them. Yes. The child looked at him for another moment, then glanced at Vesha. You did not end him. No, Vesha said. The child seemed to process this, her expression shifting through several stages of thought before settling into something that resembled acceptance. Good, she said finally. We are building things now. Ending things would be inefficient. Coran blinked. Vesha inclined her head slightly. That is correct. The child nodded once, satisfied, then returned to her group, immediately resuming her work as if the exchange had been entirely ordinary. Coran watched her go. Your children are direct. They have not yet learned to pretend otherwise. That might be an advantage. It is, Vesha said, until it is not. They resumed walking. The pathway curved upward, leading them toward a higher tier of the city. From here, the view expanded, revealing the full scale of reconstruction. Energy grids reconnecting, transit lines reactivating, entire sections of infrastructure rising from carefully coordinated effort. Coran rested his hands briefly on the railing that bordered the walkway. It's impressive, he said. Unsettling, but impressive. Unsettling, Vesha asked. It's very precise, he explained. Where I come from, rebuilding tends to involve a lot more arguing. There is arguing here as well. I do not hear it. That is because it is happening efficiently. Coran smiled faintly. I will have to study that technique. Vesha turned her gaze toward him. You study everything, she said. It seems like the safer approach. And what have you concluded so far? Coran considered the question, his expression shifting into something more thoughtful. That I was prepared for something simpler, he said, Clear lines, clear outcomes. You either end me or we negotiate or we fail. I did not account for, he gestured vaguely around them. This, he finished. Vesha followed the motion of his hand, taking in the city, the movement, the fragile balance of rebuilding. Nor did I, she said. The admission settled between them, quiet but significant. Coran glanced at her. That's comforting, in a concerning sort of way. It should not be comforting. It is, a little. Vesha exhaled slowly. They stood there for a moment, side by side, overlooking a city that was still deciding what it would become. After a while, Coran straightened. I assume this is the part where you explain the strategic importance of this location. Vesha turned away from the view, her posture shifting back into its familiar precision. It is, she said. He nodded. Good. I was beginning to think we were having an unscheduled moment. We were. Coran paused. Oh, he said. Vesha continued walking. After a brief hesitation, he followed. Neither of them spoke for several steps, though something had shifted again, subtle, unspoken, but no less real. And neither of them, this time, seemed particularly eager to correct it. The chamber assigned for strategic review was smaller than the negotiation hall, though no less precise in its construction. Its walls were layered with adaptive interfaces, shifting quietly as data streamed across them in controlled patterns. At the center stood a circular platform currently occupied by a suspended projection of the contested regions, rotating slowly, glowing with intersecting lines of territory, supply routes, and fragile agreements. Vesha stood within the light of it, her figure cut sharply against the projection as if she were part of the system itself. Her long ears angled slightly forward, focused, attentive. Across from her, Coran watched the rotating model with a look that hovered somewhere between concentration and mild suspicion. It's rotating faster than it was earlier, he said. It is responding to your gaze. Coran did not look away. That feels like an unnecessary level of engagement. It allows for adaptive interaction. It also feels like it's judging me. It is not. Coran nodded slowly. I will proceed under that assumption. The projection shifted again, zooming in on a fractured sector where several transit lines intersected. Vesha moved her hand slightly and the system responded instantly, isolating key structures, highlighting areas of instability. This sector remains a point of contention, she said. Your people have requested shared access to the transit grid. Yes, Coran replied. It's difficult to rebuild anything if we cannot reach it. You will reach it, Vesha said. The question is under whose authority? Coran folded his arms loosely. Ideally, not under someone who still considers us a long-term inconvenience. That is a temporary assessment. I am relieved to hear we are only temporarily inconvenient. Vesha ignored that. She adjusted the projection again, bringing up historical overlays, damage patterns, energy disruptions, the cascading failures that had followed the initial strikes. The data moved like a story written in light, precise, and unforgiving. Coran studied it in silence for a moment. Then he exhaled. We made a mess. Yes, Vesha said. No argument? There is no need. He nodded, though his expression tightened slightly. Good. That saves time. The projection dimmed briefly as new data integrated into the system. A faint ripple passed through the room, barely noticeable unless one was paying close attention. Coran tilted his head. Was that intentional? Yes. It felt uncertain. Vesha glanced at the system. It is recalibrating. That is not a word that inspires confidence. It is a necessary process. Coran considered that. I also use that phrase when I do not fully understand what is happening. Vesha's gaze returned to him, sharp but not hostile. You understand enough, she said. That is debatable. You are still here. Coran allowed a small smile. That does seem to be a recurring theme. The projection stabilized, the faint ripple fading into a steady glow. Vesha stepped slightly to the side, creating a clearer view for him. This is where your proposal fails, she said, indicating a cluster of interconnected routes. You assume a linear restoration of the grid. That is not how our systems function. Coran leaned in slightly, studying the pattern. You're right, he said after a moment. That is not how your systems function. Vesha paused. You agree, she said. Yes. There was a brief silence. That was faster than expected, she added. I try to adapt quickly, Coran replied. It reduces the number of times I am corrected. That is not its only benefit. I am beginning to suspect that. Vesha adjusted the projection again, her movements precise, controlled. The data shifted, reorganizing into a more complex structure, nonlinear, layered, difficult to follow at first glance. Coran stared at it. Then he blinked. Then he leaned back slightly. I see, he said. You do not. No, he admitted. But I'm confident I will eventually. Vesha almost responded immediately. Instead, she hesitated. A small pause, barely noticeable. Then she moved her hand again, simplifying part of the structure, isolating key elements. Coran's eyes followed the change. That helps. It was inefficient, she said. It was helpful. Vesha did not answer that. They continued working through the projection, point by point, the conversation shifting between precise analysis and unexpected moments of ease. The tension that should have defined every exchange was still there, but it no longer dominated the space. It had been displaced, not removed, just moved aside, enough to allow something else to exist alongside it. At one point, Coran stepped back from the platform, stretching his shoulders slightly. I have a question, he said. Ask it. How long do your people typically conduct sessions like this? As long as necessary. That is not a time measurement. It is sufficient. Coran nodded slowly. I will inform my body of that. It may disagree. It will adjust. I admire your confidence in that. Vesha studied him for a moment. You are fatigued, she said. Yes. And yet you continue. Yes. Why? Coran considered the question. Then he gestured toward the projection, toward the shifting lines of a future still being negotiated. Because stopping would be less productive, he said. Vesha held his gaze. There it was again. That same answer, in a different form. Simple, annoying, difficult to dismiss. She turned back to the projection. We will continue, she said. I assumed we would. A faint pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, Coran added, though if the system suggests another recipe, I would like to formally request something simpler. Vesha did not turn. What would you consider simple? She asked. Bread, he said. There was a brief silence. Then quietly, almost imperceptibly, something in the edge of her expression shifted. Continue, she said again. And he did. The night cycle settled over the city with a quiet precision that felt almost deliberate, as if the world itself had agreed to lower its voice. The artificial constellations above dimmed slightly, their patterns shifting into slower, deeper rhythms. Energy lines beneath the walkways softened from sharp illumination to a steady glow, like breath easing after strain. Vesha stood alone on the upper terrace of the central structure, her posture still but not rigid. Below, the city continued its careful reconstruction, though at a gentler pace. Even the machines seemed to move with less urgency, their sounds blending into a distant hum. She had not intended to remain here this long. That, she noted, was becoming a pattern. Behind her, the doors opened with a soft, controlled sound. She did not turn. I was told this level was restricted, Coran said as he stepped onto the terrace, which I interpreted as a suggestion rather than a rule. It is a rule, Vesha replied. I see. A pause. And yet, he added, glancing around, here I am. Vesha turned then, her gaze steady. You are not easily discouraged. No, Coran said. It has rarely been useful. He moved closer, though not enough to intrude on her space. The distance between them remained carefully measured, though it no longer felt as deliberate as it once had. For a while neither of them spoke. The city filled the silence for them. Coran rested his hands lightly against the railing, looking out over the layered structures, the slow movement of reconstruction. It looks different at this hour, he said. It is quieter. That helped, he admitted. During the day, it feels like everything is trying to prove something. And now? Now it feels like everything is trying to recover. Vesha considered that. You assign intention to systems that do not possess it, she said. Coran tilted his head slightly. We do that. It makes things easier to understand. It is not accurate. It is useful. Vesha did not immediately respond. Coran glanced at her, then back at the city. I assume this is the part where you tell me usefulness is not a priority. It is not, she said. He nodded. There it is. A faint movement passed through the air as a small surveillance drone drifted along the edge of the terrace. It paused briefly, scanning both of them before continuing on its path. Coran watched it go. I am starting to feel very popular. You are being monitored. I assumed as much. It would be concerning if I wasn't. You find that reassuring? In a way, he said. It means I am still considered relevant. Vesha studied him for a moment. You measure your value by attention, she said. No, Coran replied. But it's a convenient indicator. She turned her gaze back to the city. For a while they stood in silence again, the kind that no longer felt like an absence of words, but something else, something quieter, more complicated. You expected to die, Vesha said suddenly. Yes. Coran did not look at her when he answered. You have said this before, she continued. Yes. And yet you remain. Yes. There was a slight shift in her posture. That is not a sufficient explanation, she said. Coran exhaled slowly, his gaze still fixed on the city below. No, he admitted. It isn't. A longer pause followed. Then he spoke again, more carefully. I came here because someone had to, he said, and I was, available. That is not a reason. It is a starting point. Vesha turned her head slightly, her attention sharpening. You reduce significance to convenience, she said. I reduce complexity to something I can work with, Coran replied. The significance comes later. And has it? She asked. Coran was quiet for a moment. Then finally he looked at her. Yes, he said. The words settled between them, heavier than it should have been. Vesha held his gaze, searching for something. Clarity, perhaps, or contradiction. She found neither. That is inefficient, she said. Coran smiled faintly. You've mentioned that before. It remains true. Most things do, when you repeat them often enough. There was a brief pause. Then, unexpectedly, Vesha spoke again. I was certain, she said. Coran's expression shifted slightly. About what? You, she replied. About what you represented. About what I would do when I saw you. Coran leaned slightly against the railing, his posture relaxed but attentive. And now, he asked. Vesha did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked back out over the city, her long ears angling subtly as if catching something distant. Something only she could hear. Now, she said at last, you are less precise. Coran considered that. I apologize, he said. I try to maintain a consistent level of clarity. That is not what I mean. I know, he admitted. A faint sound escaped him, something close to a quiet laugh, though softer, more restrained. I was prepared for you to hate me, he said. It seemed reasonable. It was, Vesha replied. And yet, he added, gesturing lightly between them, this is not that. No, she said. Another pause. Coran glanced down briefly, then back up. For what it's worth, I was also prepared for you to be less reasonable. Vesha's gaze sharpened slightly. Less reasonable, she repeated. Yes, he said. More immediate. I am capable of being immediate. I do not doubt that. A moment passed. Please do not demonstrate it, he added. Vesha looked at him. Then very slowly she turned back to the city. I will consider your request, she said. Coran nodded, as if that were a perfectly acceptable outcome. The silence returned, though it felt different now. Less guarded, more aware. After a while, Coran shifted slightly, adjusting his position against the railing. I have another question, he said. Vesha did not look at him. Ask it. How do you remember something you are no longer certain about, he asked. That finally made her turn. Her expression did not change, but something beneath it did. You do not, she said. That seems inconvenient. It is accurate. Coran nodded slowly. I am noticing a pattern in your preferences. Vesha held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then, without a word, she turned away and began to walk toward the exit. Coran hesitated briefly, then followed. Neither of them spoke again, but something had shifted. Not enough to name, not enough to understand, enough to matter. The upper transit ring had only recently been restored, its surface still carrying the faint shimmer of systems not yet fully settled into equilibrium. Energy flowed beneath it in controlled streams, visible through the translucent material underfoot, like quiet currents beneath ice. The pathway curved high above the city, offering a view that was both expansive and strangely intimate. Layers of reconstruction unfolding in every direction, each movement part of something larger and not entirely predictable. Vesha walked along its arc with measured steps, her posture composed, though not as rigid as it had once been. The air here was thinner, cleaner, shaped by atmospheric filters that whispered softly as they adjusted to the night cycle. Behind her, footsteps followed, not guards, not advisors. Coran. You choose very elevated locations, he said as he caught up to her. I assume this is intentional. It allows for perspective, Vesha replied. It also increases the consequences of poor balance. You are not at risk of falling. That sounds like confidence. It is observation. Coran glanced down through the translucent surface, watching the distant movement of the city below. I will choose to believe you. They continued walking. The ring responded subtly to their presence, adjusting its structure in microscopic ways to maintain stability. A faint line of light traced their path, marking their movement like a quiet acknowledgement. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence here felt different than the terrace. Less contained, more open. You are avoiding the chamber, Vesha said. Coran did not look at her. Yes. That is inefficient. Yes. A brief pause. And yet you continue to do it, she added. Yes. Vesha glanced at him, her gaze steady. Explain. Coran exhaled slowly, his attention still on the distant city. It is easier to think out here, he said. In the chamber, everything feels structured, defined. Every word has weight before it is even spoken. That is the purpose of it. I know, he said. That is the problem. Vesha considered that. You prefer uncertainty, she said. No, Coran replied. I prefer space. That is not the same. It is sometimes. They walked a little further, the curve of the ring carrying them toward a section where the city lights below grew denser, brighter, more alive. A maintenance drone passed overhead, its sensors briefly illuminating them in a soft sweep of light before it continued on its path. Coran watched it go. I am beginning to recognize these, he said. You have seen many of them. Yes, he nodded. I am considering giving them names. That would be unnecessary. It would make them easier to talk about. You do not need to talk about them. Coran glanced at her. You say that, but I feel like I might. Vesha did not respond. The faintest shift touched the edge of her expression. Something not quite visible, not quite absent. They reached a quieter section of the ring, where the structure widened slightly, forming a viewing platform that extended outward. The city stretched below them, no longer fractured in appearance, but still carrying the memory of it in its lines. Coran stopped. Vesha took one more step before noticing, then paused as well. You are stopping, she said. Yes. Why? Coran rested his hands lightly against the edge of the platform, looking out over the city. Because this is where it changes, he said. Vesha's gaze sharpened. Explain. Coran hesitated as if measuring his words more carefully than usual. Up until now, he said, everything has been about what happened. The war, the damage, the responsibility. That remains true. Yes, he agreed. But this, he gestured outward, toward the city, toward the movement, the rebuilding, the fragile sense of forward motion. This is about what happens next. Vesha stepped closer, though not enough to stand beside him completely. That is why we are here, she said. Yes, Coran replied, but it is not just negotiation anymore. Vesha's posture shifted slightly. That is an assumption, she said. It is an observation, he answered. A faint tension moved through the space between them. Not sharp, not hostile, just present. Vesha looked out over the city, her long ears angling subtly as if listening for something beyond the reach of ordinary sound. You believe this has become something else, she said. Yes. And what would you define it as? Coran considered the question. Then he shook his head slightly. I don't know. That is not a useful answer. It is an honest one. Vesha turned her gaze toward him. He met it, steady, unguarded. For a moment the world seemed to narrow, not disappear, but recede, leaving only the space between them, the unspoken recognition of something neither of them had intended to create. You are no longer simple, she said. Coran blinked. I was not aware I ever was. You were, she said. At first. And now? Vesha did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied him, as if trying to reconstruct something that no longer fit into its original shape. Now, she said slowly, you are difficult to categorize. Coran nodded thoughtfully. That seems like an improvement. It is not, he smiled faintly. I will take it as one. A brief silence followed. Then unexpectedly, Coran shifted slightly, his hand moving. Subtle, unintentional at first, as if he were about to gesture, to emphasize a thought he had not yet spoken. Vesha moved at the same moment, not deliberately, not consciously. Her hand met his. For a fraction of a second, neither of them reacted. Then the contact settled. It was not firm, not intentional. Just there. Coran looked down briefly, then back at her. Vesha did not move. Her gaze remained steady, though something beneath it had changed, something quieter, less controlled. Neither of them spoke. The city continued below them, unaware. The energy beneath the platform flowed as it always had. The maintenance drones passed in their distant patterns. Nothing had shifted, and yet something had. Coran's voice, when it came, was softer than before. Was that intentional? Vesha held his gaze. No, she said. A pause. Was it inefficient? He asked. Vesha did not answer. Her hand remained where it was. So did his. And for the first time since the war had ended, neither of them seemed particularly concerned with correcting the moment. The city no longer looked like it was deciding whether to exist. It existed. That was the first difference Vesha noticed as she stood once more on the elevated walkway. The same arc of translucent structure that had once felt unfinished beneath her feet. Now the energy flowing below it was steady, uninterrupted, its glow consistent and confident. The distant hum of reconstruction had softened into something else. Continuity, perhaps, or the quiet certainty of systems no longer questioning themselves. Her people moved below in organized currents, no longer repairing, but building. That was the second difference. The third stood beside her, leaning slightly against the railing as if he had always belonged there. I think it stopped judging me, Coran said, glancing upward at a passing drone. It never judged you, Vesha replied. I prefer my interpretation. That has been established. Coran nodded, satisfied with that. For a time they stood without speaking. The silence was not the same as before. It did not carry tension or uncertainty or the weight of something waiting to break. It was simply there, shared. Vesha's gaze moved across the city, tracing the lines of what had been lost and what had replaced it. The war had left its marks, but they were no longer the only story visible. You have completed your review, she said. Yes. And your recommendations have been integrated. Yes. A brief pause. And you are still here, she added. Coran tilted his head slightly. You say that as though it remains surprising. It does. He considered that. I could leave if it would restore a sense of predictability. It would not. Then I will remain, for the sake of consistency. Vesha exhaled slowly, though there was no frustration in it. That is not your function, she said. It might be, Coran replied. I am still determining my function. You were sent as a representative. Yes. You have fulfilled that role. Yes. Then your continued presence is unnecessary. Coran nodded once. That is a reasonable assessment. A small pause followed. Fortunately, he added, I am not entirely governed by necessity. There it was again, that quiet defiance, not of authority, but of expectation. Vesha turned her gaze toward him. You choose to remain, she said. Yes. Despite the fact that I intended to end your life. Yes. That does not concern you? Coran met her gaze, steady as ever. It concerned me a great deal at the time. And now? He glanced briefly at their hands. They were still there, connected, unremarked upon. I find that I have adjusted, he said. Vesha followed his gaze. For a moment, something in her posture shifted. Not outwardly, not in a way her people would recognize, but internally, a recalibration that did not align with the patterns she had trusted for so long. I do not remember when this began, she said. Coran's expression softened slightly. I was hoping you did. I do not. That's inconvenient. It is. A pause. Do you want to stop? He asked. The question was simple, unadorned. Vesha considered it, not as a ruler, not as a strategist, but as something else, something she had not needed to be in a very long time. No, she said. The words settled into the space between them, clear, unambiguous. Coran nodded once, as if confirming something he had already suspected. Good, he said. Vesha's gaze returned to the city, though her awareness did not fully leave him. The agreements are complete, she said. The conflict has ended. The reconstruction is stable. Yes. There is no further requirement for your presence. No, Coran agreed. Another pause. Then why are you still here? She asked. Coran considered the question, though not for long. Because I no longer think this was only about the war, he said. Vesha's long ears angled slightly, a subtle shift of attention. Explain. Coran gestured lightly toward the city. This will continue, with or without me, with or without you, eventually. That is accurate. But this, he glanced at their hands again, then back at her. This does not have the same certainty. Vesha studied him. You prioritize uncertainty, she said. No, Coran replied. I recognize it. And you choose it. Yes. There was no hesitation in his answer. Vesha turned fully toward him now, her gaze direct, unwavering. For my entire life, she said, I have acted with certainty. Every decision, every command, every outcome. Even my oath was certain. Coran remained still, listening. And now, she continued, I am presented with something that is not. Yes, that is inefficient. Yes, that is dangerous. Probably. A faint pause. And yet, Coran added, you have not ended it. Vesha held his gaze. No, she said. The admission felt different this time. Not like a disruption, not like a failure, like a choice. Below them, the city continued its quiet motion, unaware of the shift that had already taken place above it. You were correct, Vesha said after a moment. Coran raised an eyebrow slightly. That is a rare statement. I will try not to misuse it. This is no longer about the past, she continued. No. It is about what follows. Yes. Vesha looked out over the city one last time, taking in the structure of it, the precision, the stability she had fought to preserve. Then she looked back at him. And that, she said, is not something I can predict. Coran smiled faintly. I was hoping you would say that. A small silence settled between them. Then, almost absently, Coran shifted his stance slightly, adjusting his balance against the railing. Vesha did not let go. Neither did he. The moment did not demand resolution. It did not require definition. It simply continued. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Queen Vesha allowed something to exist without needing to control its outcome. Below them, the city lived. Above it, uncertainty remained, and neither of them now seemed particularly inclined to change that.